In my last video, I described a meditation in which I try to find me. That is to find that boundary between the objective and the subjective, between the outer world and the inner world, that is surely there, but I just couldn't find it. It turned out very elusive. Now, this was rather interesting because in magic, usually subjective experiences are very powerful. What is much harder to find is objective evidence to back that up. And this seemed to reverse that situation, because there was I trying to really feel subjectively the boundary between me, the inner and the outer, and I couldn't find it. On the other hand, it was obvious that it's there because, as I say, when people walked past, they said, "Hello, Lionel," and they greeted me. So they obviously could see me. And what's more, the more they spoke to me, the surer they would be that it was really me and not some sort of waxworks dummy or something. And even if I said, "Oh, I've changed my name, I'm now Ramsay Jukes," they would still recognize they're talking to me. So that's rather strange that the objective evidence is strongly there, and yet subjectively I can't find it. And I related that to the debate in Eastern philosophies between the Hindu idea of the Atman, or eternal soul, and the Buddhist idea that that is an illusion. Now, that illusion idea is actually much more in favor with today's rationalist skeptics, because they will quote the things I've said, and they will also back it up with scientific experiments. There's this experiment where they disprove the idea of free will, because they give someone a button to press and they say, just make up your mind when you're going to press that button. Make a quick decision and press the button. Don't time it or try to do anything clever or work to a formula. Just exercise your free will to press it when you feel like it. And they point out that every time that's done, there's a few milliseconds of prior activity in the unconscious mind, secret work that goes on before the person presses it, and yet he's absolutely sure he did it on the spur of the moment. Therefore, they say, the idea of a free will, of a self being an agent, is an illusion. Now, I addressed that when I did a video about free will a short while ago, and I compared that idea to the election denialists, because I said, as far as the world is concerned, on November the 23rd, 2020, the United States voted for Joe Biden. But what the election deniers will say, but think what happened in the weeks running up to that. There was all sorts of fake news sent out, and there was coercion of people, and people being bribed, and people fiddling the election boundaries and things like that. So the whole thing was a setup. It's a fraud. The USA didn't actually vote for Joe Biden on the day. It was a fake, a fraud. But as far as I'm concerned, they did vote for Joe Biden. And as far as I'm concerned, there was an exercise of free will. But there's still this embarrassing fact that when I tried to find my true self, I couldn't find it. And this relates to the problem of how the Abramelin operation ended for me. And I'll come back to that in a moment. But what I said at the end of that thing is that I think I can resolve this difference between immortal soul and illusion. And the way I do that, I'm going to demonstrate to you. I'm going to take a soul skeptic with me to buy an apartment. He's looking for somewhere to live, and there's a new apartment block, which is a lot of the apartments are still empty and for sale. And I suggest that we go along and look at it. And I say there's a really good one, flat 401. It's got marvellous views and it's very well situated. Okay, it's the same as all the others in shape and size, and so he comes along with me, and the estate agent unlocks the door and throws it open and said, "This is the sitting room." And the skeptic says, "No, it isn't." He says, "It's just the same shape, size as all the other sitting rooms. So you can't say it's the sitting room. It's just a sitting room." Really? This is the sitting room for flat 401. Oh, no, it isn't. No. It's not a sitting room. There's nowhere to sit. It's just empty space. Yes, it is a sitting room. You're asking me to pay £50,000 for nothing. It's just empty space. There's nothing here. It's not a sitting room. I've looked at the brochure. I know what a sitting room looks like. And I say, "Well, what about the view? It's amazing." He says, "But you can't sell me the view. It's not part of this house. It's out there. Someone builds a block there, it'll spoil the view. You don't own it. Send up a drone and you could get the same view. So this is a complete fraud. You're swindling me, taking my money for nothing. You're offering nothing." So what have I done there? Well, I said that these two schools of thought in Eastern philosophy, there's the idea we have an eternal soul and the idea that that's an illusion. And that I was very interested in those when I was young. But the thing is that I won't say I grew out of them, I grew away from them because I discovered another Eastern philosophy, namely Taoism. And that's why I began to forget the terms and the arguments of Buddhism and Hinduism. It wasn't that Taoism, I could say, is anyway better. It's just it really suited me temperamentally. It's paradoxical. It's that idea of fullness is emptiness, emptiness is fullness. And that really suited my nature. And of course, the relevance to what I'm saying now, if I quote from the Tao Te Ching, "We turn clay to make a vessel, but it is on the space where there is nothing that the usefulness of the vessel depends. We pierce doors and windows to make a house, and it is on those places where there is nothing that the usefulness of the house depends." In other words, the usefulness of that flat we're selling was its empty space, because it's sheer potential. You could do whatever you like with it. You could make it your sitting room. And it is, okay, the same shape as the others, and yet it is uniquely the sitting room for flat 401. So, the problem, these two people wanting to go and buy an apartment, is what are they actually looking for? And the sole skeptic had decided in his mind what a sitting room would look like, and he'll recognize it immediately when he walks in. This is a sitting room. And he didn't see it. He just saw empty space. Whereas the Taoist was looking for potential, something to work with. Now, I'm just going to emphasize that point by going with the skeptic to buy a vase. So I say to the skeptic, "We both want a vase, don't we?" "Well, there's a fantastic antiques workshop in antiques, oh God, what do you call the thing? Antiques warehouse in town. And it's got thousands of things like vases, a terrific selection." And he says, "Oh, I know that place, yes. But if you want a good vase, you must go to the top floor, because that's where the quality antiques are." And I say, "No, on the ground floor, there's a fantastic bric-a-brac collection. They've got everything there, really cheap." So we go there, and we go into the ground floor, and I look around, and I pick up perfect, this is what I'm looking for. And he says, what? That's a bit of lousy mass-produced rubbish. You don't want that thing. No, 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 come up to the top and get something decent. And I say, no, this is perfect. I want it for flower arrangement. And I don't want people looking at the vase. I want them to look at the flower arrangement. That's what matters. So I buy that, and I'm very happy with it, if it is a bit of plastic rubbish. But he takes me up to the top floor and he says, now look, this is what you really want. This is a vase. This is genuine 13th century Ming. Just look at the beautiful, the details of it and everything. And I say, oh, neck's a bit narrow. You couldn't put many tulips into that one. Everything. He said, oh, God, you wouldn't put flowers and water into this. This is a precious thing. This will hand down to generations after generation. It'll go up in value. And you see, that is the difference. I think that when people set out to prove that there is not an immortal soul, they're actually rebelling against the sort of Protestant idea of a soul which will be reborn when the last trump sounds. And scientifically, that's a load of nonsense. And you can produce all these arguments that such a thing doesn't exist. You go along with the Buddhist idea, that's just an illusion. But on the other hand, as a working idea, a thing to give meaning to life and everything, the belief in a soul is a very useful thing. Now, what is particularly interesting to me is what happened when I did the Abramelin operation. You see, at the end, I felt at the time that I'd failed. With retrospect, I'm not so sure. What about at the beginning? When I started to do the Abramelin operation, part of the attraction for me was that it specifically said it doesn't matter what your religion is. You can do this in the spirit of whether you're a Christian or a Jew or whatever. And I actually found that quite difficult because I was enough of a Taoist to think, what am I trying to contact? My inner silence, my uncarved block, something like that. And a lot of my meditation practices were actually based on Taoist yoga. But the reality is that I was three people. I was an 11-year-old child who first got hands on a copy of the book of the Sacred Magic of Abramelin the Mage, and was entranced by it. Entranced by the idea of meeting your holy guardian angel, a magnificent person I pictured in robes and holding a flaming sword. Wow, that was what I expected when I was 11 years old. But after that, I discovered Taoism, and so I became a Taoist in spirit. And then when I was at university, I discovered the works of Aleister Crowley, and I became a Thelemite. So, when I was writing my vow to take this operation, I was aware it was a bit of a dilemma because as a Taoist, I couldn't quite expect a traditional guardian angel. What would I find? I'd find the way, the Tao, or something like that. Something quite mysterious, something empty and full at the same time. But as a Thelemite, I was quite convinced that surely with 6 months' hard preparation, what I would find would be my true will. I don't know what my true will is, but I would surely recognize it when I found it. So that was probably what I was particularly expecting. What I didn't like to admit is that there was still a 11-year-old child in me that wanted to see an angel in fine robes and holding a sword to appear and speak to me at the end. And of course that didn't happen. And I had a sense of disappointment. I was angry at the end, as it says in my account of it. And looking back, I realized that I did reach a space of silence that was very sort of meaningful, and the world became very brilliant and clear as though it had just been reborn at that time. And it's taken me years and years and years to sort of really appreciate that. And I think in a way what I found was the Taoist, the empty space. Just as in that exercise I described, which I did of removing the labels that society puts on me. You know, I'm a 79-year-old British man. You know, I point out that if I was ceased to be British, I would still be me. If I was a year later, I'll be 80, I'll still be me. If I had a sex change, I would still be me in a real sense, and so on. Removing all those labels, I found that instead of coming down to finding nothing, I discovered my true humanity. So I found something universal, and yet in terms of a personal me, it was nothing. And yet it was everything, because it linked me to all humankind. It's it's this sort of Taoist paradox, the emptiness and the fullness at the same time I was finding. So that's my suggestion of how to resolve this. Now note, I'm not saying that Taoism is better and it replaced the other two. What I'm saying is that when you added that third factor, whereas before you just could have been a religious war between whether we have a everlasting soul or whether it's just an illusion. Instead, you have a sort of flowing situation where you can go to buy a vase and you can decide you're going to go for the perfect heirloom vase, or you can decide that actually you want to do practical stuff like making flower arrangements, and you can go for a very nondescript plain vase. And you could choose, and you can realize in a way what was important about both of them is the space they held, and so on. You've got a moving, living system. And that, to me, is a very good illustration of the point I made in The Good, the Bad, the Funny, that when you have a polarity, a battle, God, devil, good, bad, if you could find a third trickster position, it doesn't mean the trickster's better than the other two, but once you've found that, you no longer have a locked battle. What you have is a living system where you can flow between the different states and you can choose, and sometimes one is the best and other times the other. It's a living system. Just as a threefold system, has a beginning, a continuation, and a transformation to the next cycle, and so on. And that, to me, was why I spent so much time looking for the trick in all these polarities. Because if you can find the trick, and you can find the trickster, if you can find a third principle, very often that is what resolves the tension, the battle. And one example is a very obvious battle in our society is rich, poor. People who get richer and richer, and the poor people. And for me, an example of a trickster in that thing is education. Once you add education to the mix, you begin to break up that rock-solid polarity. And people are very aware of that in Africa, where very poor families, the parents will actually be prepared to go hungry in order that their child could have a better education, because they know that is the one thing that can break that impenetrable barrier between the rich and the poor. So that's my argument for looking for the trickster, adding the trickster to the mix, and breaking up the harshness of that polarity. So I'm very much for the trickster, but in my next video I would like to point out there is also danger in the trickster.